Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Stimson Center's webinar this morning, US-Japan Defense Cooperation and Maritime Domain. I'm waiting for everyone to be led in to this webinar. So we were going to get started in about 2 minutes. Okay, I think we have a limited time, so we're gonna get started. Again, good morning to those of you who are channeling in from the United States, and good evening for those of you who are channeling in from Japan and elsewhere in Asia. Welcome to Stimson's Voices from Japan National Security Speaker Series webinar. Today, I am very delighted to have two great naval officer that I deeply respect to this webinar, who will speak about who will speak their thoughts about the US-Japan Defense Cooperation in the maritime domain. As all of us know, maritime domain has become very critical area of a great power competition, but that is all the more reason why the alliance cooperation as such, as a close-up between the close allies like US Japan, is becoming even more important. And I can't really think of any two other gentlemen who could speak strategically and politically about policy-wise about these issues. Speakers this morning or this evening, wherever you are, don't really need much introduction, but I would very quickly introduce to you our two speakers. From Tokyo, we have Admiral Tomohisa Takei, who most of you know. He was the 32nd Chief of Staff of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, and he retired out of that position in 2016. And he currently works at the researcher and advisor at several Japanese think tanks. And he was the first ever distinguished international fellow from Japan in the international programs at the U.S. Naval War College, the position he served until the 2020. From the United States, we have Admiral John Richardson, again, who's he served as the 31st Chief of Naval Operations in the United States Navy and retired after 37 years of a distinguished service. Let me give you quickly the ground rules for today. So for those of you in the audience, please keep yourself mute while one of us or all of us are speaking. And when the time of a question and answer comes, please do not use the chat function. I will not be able to monitor those and Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, there is a specific box for Q&A. So please do use this box to present a question to the speakers. I will start the session by asking John and Takei-san 2 opening questions, and we'll immediately go to the question, and hopefully I can pick up as many questions as I go. So with that, again, Admiral Richardson, Admiral Takei, thank you so much for joining us this morning or this evening. So let me first start by asking you, Takei-san, that how maritime strategy to deter China might look like. And then I would ask John to follow with his additional comment. So Takei-san, please take it away.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, nice to see you again. Anyway, it is a good chance to show to introduce how hot Tokyo is now in many meanings. So Olympic Games will come soon, and tomorrow the qualifiers start. In here, the American softball team will play against Italy. Yeah, it is the good question, which should win or lose. Anyway, I want to discuss what China's activities are and challenges to our maritime strategy of the Indo-Pacific region. Could you show me the slide? Yes, how maritime strategy to deter China might look like. So next page, please. These activities would be objectives of the cooperation between Japan and the United States to deter China. The recent vision of the government on national and regional security was articulated in the document released at the US-Japan Security Consultative Committee 2+2 in March in Tokyo, as well as the US-Japan summit meeting in April in Washington. The joint statement of summit meeting often tend to be symbolic or rhetorical message to the people of both countries. On the other hand, 2+2 joint document is more practical due to result of policy discussion by foreign and defense ministers. So I want to watch how Tokyo and Washington viewed China's activities in the Pacific based on 2+2 joint document. The latest 2+2 meeting was held in March in Tokyo. Member of committee acknowledged points shown in the slide as China's behavior were inconsistent with the existing international order, presents political, economic, military, and technological challenges to the alliance, as well as to international communities. Next, please. We can see 3 features in the list. First, there are more concern than ever about China's activities. And for the first time, the US-Japan Alliance has expressed serious concern with criticizing China by name about the human rights situation in Hong Kong and Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Regions. A large number of the reference to China's activities is a noteworthy feature not found in the previous document. Second, what Tokyo and Washington discussed was China's behavior, not its political system. If Washington followed Trump administration views competition with China as ideological confrontation between democracy and communism or political system conflict, Tokyo may have failed to agree on the joint document because there are lawmakers that have various views about China in the ruling coalition parties. It is a little worrisome for me that President Biden often refers to current global political landscape as a competition between democracy and also authoritarianism. I think this view seems to work negatively, especially in the Pacific. Dr. Adam Leaf of the Indiana University pointed out that choice of security partners in the Pacific region is more complex than it was in the Cold War, and cannot be simply divided into democracy and the others. Tokyo's basic policy toward Beijing is to deal with China in a fair and impartial manner. Tokyo cooperate and criticize Beijing case by case. Not only socialist Vietnam, but also Singapore, India, and many other countries in the Indo-Pacific that are eager to enhance security cooperation with the United States are not, by conventional definition, liberal or democratic. Only Indonesia could be categorized democracy in Western standards. If Tokyo and Washington need to cooperate with the countries in the Indo-Pacific region to deter China, while keeping these countries close to the framework of international cooperation, they should focus on China's behavior, not on its political structure. Third feature of the 2+2 joint document is all items other than human rights issues should be dealt with in the maritime strategies. In other words, the items the next screen represent China's behavior that maritime strategy should deter. Next, please. There are some items that Japan should take the initiative in, but there are also items that can be expected to be more efficient and highly effective if conducted jointly with the United States. Strengthening the defense of senkakus should be carried out by Japan, not on the premise that U.S. forces will come to support Japan. Next, please. There are two areas in which Japan and the United States can work together. First is to maintain rule-based maritime order. China's activities in question in the East and South China Sea, such as obstructive behavior for freedom of navigation and fishing boats around China's artificial islands, and ignoring the 2016 award of International Court of Justice challenges to the maintaining maritime order based on law. Beijing has intentionally created and implemented domestic laws to resolve dispute with other countries, which is so-called rule by law, that is not at all aligned with various democracies. To maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea, Tokyo takes a means to deploy maritime self-defense force in the South China Sea for as long as possible throughout the year. The long-term deployment has only meant tacitly to counter Beijing's baseless maritime claim in the South China Sea. Tokyo's reluctance to take part of activities to the freedom of navigation that British and French navies conducted in the South China Sea seems that Tokyo fears Beijing's giving tit for tat around senkakus. However, despite Tokyo's self-restrained attitude in the South China Sea, China is escalating unlawful activities and harassment. China's patrol boats stayed in the continuous zone of senkakus for 330 days, entered territorial water 29 days last year, and more than that, even chasing Japanese fishing boat at the area where Japan has sovereignty right. In other words, regardless of Tokyo's intention, Beijing is increasing pressure on senkakus. Tokyo, along with Washington and partner, will need to review their tactics in the South China Sea to deter China's misbehavior. The second is the government showed intention to tackle proactively the issues of maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Tokyo and Taipei have handled with greatest care to develop close economic relations even after cutting former diplomatic relations in 1972. Tokyo's basic policy has not changed about 50 years, despite having annual people-to-people exchanges reached more than 7 million. Therefore, it must have been a big political decision for Tokyo to include name of Taiwan in the official document. However, with considering the geographic proximity between Japan and Taiwan, it should be considered that situation arising in Taiwan Strait would spread to Senkakus and Southwest Islands. Japan should avoid situation in which Taiwan, a democratic and high-tech giant, falls into the same situation as Hong Kong. It is not a good idea for Tokyo to stick to 50-year-old Taiwan policy in the current tense situation in the Taiwan Strait. According to the series of remarks by Prime Minister Suga after his return to Japan, Suga administration might be hesitating to change Japan's China policy or attempting to keep distance from Biden's administration's China policy or struggling to create new policy against various opinions within the ruling coalition party. As long as regarding new defense white paper issued last week, my third assumption, struggling to create new policy seems correct. If so, it is really good news. In addition to China policy, there seems to be different enthusiasm between public opinion in two countries on the Taiwan Strait, which might widen the gap in the alliance cooperation stance regarding Taiwan Strait. That is my biggest concern. So Tokyo and Washington should begin to establish cooperative maritime strategy by identifying common strategic objectives first. Next, please. Finally, I'd like to discuss the value of multilateral frameworks as means of deterring China's misbehavior. As means to implement the 2+2 document, the US-Japan Alliance strengthened relations with other partners and countries of shared values. Specifically, Japan will strengthen the framework of Quad and cooperate with ASEAN in Southeast Asia. China's misbehavior is extending its footprint globally. In response to international calls for explanation of origin of COVID-19, China responded with wolf warrior diplomacy, intimidate diplomatically, use economic pressure, and showed no signs of making concessions. The statement of G7 summit meeting in June is one of the evidence that China's behavior has already become a global concern. Next, please. While countries in the EU and NATO lead effort to deter China's misbehavior in Europe, JapanUS Alliance has a responsibility to lead effort in the Indo-Pacific. In this case, the alliance can be the linchpin to connect regional countries. For example, the Quad was created by the integration of two trilateral relations, namely Japan, the US, Australia, and Japan, the US, and India. It can be said that Japan-US Alliance is linking Australia and India, which don't get along historically. The Japan-US Alliance can be invite countries with shared value into the framework of regional security, such as FOIP and Quad, while using a set of alliance as platform to link countries outside the region to the regions. Japan and Australia are in the final stage of concluding the Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, if Japan wants to provide logistic support for foreign military in the future. An agreement similar to the Japan-Australia RAA would facilitate operation on and around Japan. Next, please. Second example is the US-Japan Britain Trilateral Naval Cooperation established in 2016. The picture on the left shows the chiefs of naval staff of the Japan, America, and Britain discussing trilateral cooperation in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. To the right is a photograph of the current members they reaffirmed the agreement on board HMS Queen Elizabeth in 2019. Next, please. Japan and UK already have various agreements necessary for defense cooperation in the Western Pacific. With utilizing the diplomatic asset, Japan can provide logistic support to British forces. The next step in strengthening Japan-UK cooperation would be conclusion of RAA. And Japan-UK relations will serve as a model to invite foreign countries in the Pacific. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Takei-san. I think you stole my second question, so I think I would just ask John to respond to ask to add anything that you may have on the Takei-san's presentation. I think that covered the both questions that I had for you, gentlemen. So take it away, John.
No, thank you, Yuki, and thanks also to the Stimson Center for sponsoring this event. Always, just as always, a high-class event that the Stimson Center and you, Yuki, personally bring. It's also a great pleasure to be once again on stage, if you will, with my good friend Takei-san. As I was the chief of the U.S. Navy, one of the most rewarding things that happened during my tenure was the chance to participate and cooperate with Takei-san as he was the chief of staff of the Kaijo Jietai. And so, my friend, thank you so much for being my partner today. And everything I learned, or so much of what I learned about this region, I learned from Takei-san. So it should not be a huge surprise that we agree on so many points in terms of the strategic approach to the region in the U.S.-Japan partnership. And perhaps just to make a few things clear up front, you know, the United States, like so many other nations that Takei-san mentioned, is part of the community of Pacific nations. And therefore, we must be engaged as a nation in the Pacific. And therefore, we must be engaged in the Western Pacific and in Asia. And that'll continue a long history of United States participation in the region, a history that I would hope people recognize has helped and contributed to the economic and security framework that really has enabled so many nations to rise, including the United States, Japan, China, and so many others in the region have thrived. And I agree also with Takei-san that recently, you know, China's behavior has become increasingly concerning, drawing the attention of the international community in more and more specific and urgent ways. And I would just add that you know, the recent by name calling of China's participation in cyber events, I think, is another example of where they are just raising concerns in the international community. So, you know, what does this maritime strategy to deter China look like? You know, I think just as Takei-san said, it's the United States and Japan contributing in a very unique way, because our partnership and our alliance is so strong, that is based on rules that allow all nations in the region to thrive and to compete on a level playing field. And that would include you know, free transit over the maritime waters in accordance with international law. That would include access to markets in the region and the sea lanes that connect those markets. It would be, you know, done in a way that nobody is harassed. Everybody can proceed in an unprovoked and unintimidated manner. And I would also add that in its best manifestation, this approach would highlight and maximize transparency so that it would minimize ambiguity, and everybody's intentions should be made as clear as possible. This would reduce and minimize, hopefully, the chance for miscalculation, which I think is, you know, perhaps one of the biggest risks in the region as tensions continue to rise. And you know, the U.S. and Japan, as Takei-san pointed out, has actively led and participated and and been formative in the formation of many multilateral arrangements, starting with bilateral arrangements, very powerful one between the US and Japan, but there are others with Japan and other countries, the United States and other countries. Some of these have expanded into trilateral agreements and arrangements. And, that's not a linear thing necessarily, right? To bring another partner in is often a great accomplishment and only done after a tremendous amount of solid diplomacy and work to determine what the common interests of three are. And even more so now that we have this exciting development of the Quad. And, the Quad with US, Japan, Australia, and India has been something that has kind of been on our list of goals to achieve for some time. And it gives me great optimism that all of that work has been productive, and that the quadrilateral grouping of those four countries, I think, can lend a lot to stability in the Indo-Pacific region. And then, of course, there are others. There's ASEAN and some others that are also very, very useful and powerful if they are well led and focused on a common set of principles. And then, to the degree that it is helpful, backed up by a formal set of agreements or arrangements. And then I think, those agreements, to take it one step further, once signed, must be brought alive, right, through a series of activities. And so, if a multilateral a group or a bilateral group puts in place a logistics sharing agreement, then, by gosh, we should be sharing logistics. We should actually make things move. And it's this visible practice of the agreements that I think brings a tremendous deterrent value, right? This is a visible thing that everybody can see in terms of the cooperation amongst like-minded partners, and also gives, sort of an implication of the levels of cooperation that may not be so visible, but that everybody can surmise without too much trouble. And so these agreements, we can't let them just become nice things on a bookshelf somewhere. We actually have to get out there. If we have an information sharing agreement, that we should be vigorously sharing information. Some of it, very visibly, and the rest maybe a little bit more quietly. And then finally, I would just say that while Takei-san and I are most articulate in the naval maritime domain, that these agreements must be exercised across all elements of national power, right? And so certainly the military and security elements of power, but also the economic, the diplomatic, financial, legal, technological, everyone, I think, should be part of this agreement. And so, I guess in summary, and to close out this question, I'll just say that I vigorously agree with my partner, Takei-san, that the United States and Japan share a special relationship, which can be a fulcrum to empowering and invigorating other multilateral arrangements that, if exercised, can have a strong deterrent effect in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As you can imagine, questions are already pouring in. So I'm going to move, if it's okay with you both, I would just transition right into picking up their questions. So both of you mentioned a Quad and other multilateral arrangement beyond US-Japan. So let me start with that question first. So there is a very simple question coming in that to both of you. Maybe I'll start with John on this one, but what are the new and what are some of the new, quote unquote, new initiative you might like to see coming out of the Quad when the four countries leader meet next time? So obviously, last one kind of stayed on the, except for the Advanced Technology Working Group, they kind of stayed clear on the political, economic, political, military realm when in terms of specific action agenda. So if you are to see something like that coming out of the next Quad Leaders Summit, what are the things that you would like to see? I'll start with you, John, on this one, and ask Takei-san to follow.
Sure, Yuki. I think that this Quad, if it's going to realize its full potential, would start with those things that are, of course, nobody can disagree with. You'll have clear agreement on those principles and those activities, but over time should expand. And so I think that it would be a natural thing for particularly in the maritime domain, for our navies to get together and do multilateral exercises together. The Malabar exercise has already moved very much in this direction and is really, I think, an example and an enabler for the Quad. But here, another thing is that I would not necessarily add additional exercises on, because that gets to be very expensive and everybody's guarding their resources. But where I believe we can make some tremendous progress is in the complexity of those exercises. And so that, the four navies partnering together, the naval exercises, and of course I'm biased here, they're tremendous avenues for diplomatic growth. Right, we can take advantage of the common culture that all sailors share. We can go out into international waters, and so there are no, diplomatic clearances or boots on the ground types of matters. But once out there, the forces and the leadership in particular need to fully cooperate with each other. You need a common operational plan. You need to be able to communicate. There are some rules, safety regulations, et cetera, that all lead to real cooperation and participation, which can be leveraged in a very powerful way. And so I would think that, certainly this type of military exercise would be a terrific next step. And that would lead, I think, to other, perhaps more complex and more deeply policy-oriented types of activities. But as a first step, I think that naval cooperation provides you a terrific launching point.
Thank you. Takei-san, do you have anything to add to what John just laid out?
Yes, for my understanding, there are three multilateral frameworks in this region. There are the Quad and the FOIP. FOIP is the Free and Open Pacific, and ASEAN Outlook. These three have each characters everything is inclusive, but each framework has a meaning, especially for the ASEAN Outlook is the economic oriented, and FOIP is the diplomacy oriented, and Quad is, this is my understanding, the defense oriented. So the next step, the next step of the Quad, new initiative about the Quad could be the defense policy or defense something. And FOIP is maybe economic or the other one. So the Quad should be formalized, functionalized, the three working groups, they agreed, the four countries agreed. And next step could be find something, some defense or security objectives of the challenges to cope with the four countries. That's all.
Thank you. Staying on the theme of Quad, there are concerns amongst mainly in the, particularly among ASEAN countries, that Quad cooperation or Quad framework might overshadow ASEAN centrality in the region's security architecture. So how do we address such concern? That's one. And since both of you were very deeply engaged in expanding the naval cooperation to other European partners in the Indo-Pacific, such as UK, what do you see as a role that these European naval powers can play in augmenting perhaps the Quad? I would start with you, Takei-san, and then ask John to follow.
Yeah, there are many incentives the European countries can participate in the Indo-Pacific region. For example, to protect basic values or the sort of China policy, securities, and to protect rule of law, and economy and human rights. In the European countries, it is far from in the Pacific regions, and the public opinion is European nation do not completely support the countries that come to the countries send their troops to the Indo-Pacific region. So the Germany, the UK, and the France, and the Holland will send the destroyer frigate to the Indo-Pacific region. I think their mission is to protect the basic values or the rule of law. That is the objective in the Pacific region. I think the counter-China policy or the human rights could be not so strong because the ASEAN country is very difficult to accept the forces by using such objectives to join the framework. So the Asian country, there are many different types of the countries. One is a communist, one is a socialist, and one is democratic. And the ASEAN Outlook, the initiative, they're focusing on very low about China policy and human rights. So when US and European countries send their troops to the Indo-Pacific region, I think their main objective would be to protect basic values for the rule of law in the Indo-Pacific and especially in the South Pacific, South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, Yuki, I would just pick up from that. I think with respect to the European powers and their role in the Pacific theater, the Indo-Pacific theater, it really, to me, goes right to the very heart and soul of why nations have navies, right? And so they have navies because so much of their prosperity and their ability to thrive as a nation lies off of their own shores, right? And one just has to, you can't help but feel the tremendous contribution that the Asian and Indo-Pacific theater is making towards world prosperity, and so the European nations, are participating in that, right? But to do that, there has to be an underlying framework of stability, an underlying framework that everybody's going to be able to participate, thrive, and compete on a level playing field in a way that conflicts are adjudicated without moving into hostilities, right? And so I think that Takei-san and I are once again in great agreement. The European nations are interested in participating in the Indo-Pacific because so much of their national interests lie there. Offshore, you're going to deploy your Navy into the theater. And as they do, I would hope that they would be mindful that they're visiting an area that has a tremendous amount of history and context to it, and there'll be an appropriate sense of humility to learn from that and to be able to fit in the way that's most productive. And that also takes me to your first question about ASEAN versus the Quad. Is one somehow going to push out the other? And I think that there's so much complexity in the Indo-Pacific region and so much history that these two arrangements are different enough in character and nature that there's plenty for both of them to do. They in the best, they would be mutually supportive, right, and not in any way competitive. And I think that we achieve that once again by being very transparent in our objectives and in the way that we go about to achieve those objectives. so that there's no ambiguity about what any of these arrangements and the others as well are about, what their goals are, how they're going to achieve those goals, and once again, minimize the opportunity for some kind of misunderstanding or miscalculation.
Thank you both. Let me shift the focus away from Quad a little bit into Taiwan Strait, where this is the issue where Japan, especially political leaders, have become more open, have begun to speak more openly about the Japan's concerns and what role Japan might or should play should something happens in the Taiwan Strait. Given the heightened rhetoric that seems to be happening, and then also, frankly, I think there are heightened activities in that across this, into the Taiwan's Strait area. Also, what more do both of you think the U.S. and Japanese militaries need to do to prepare for Taiwan contingency? Obviously, this is a sensitive topic where most of the planning would be done out of the public eye and public sight. But what are the things that are more kind of a urgent action agenda, and if you will, from both of your perspectives, for the alliance to be better prepared for potential contingency across the strait? Why don't I start from you, John, on this one, and perhaps ask Takei-san to follow? I know Takei-san probably will have a lot of things to say about that on that one, though. By the way,
Going to finish out our hour to on this question. Well, I think that there's a number of things that we must first and foremost continue to do, which is to recognize the Taiwan Strait for what it is. It's an international body of water, and so these opportunities to exercise that freedom, I think, must continue, must be really to the point that they are the normal way of doing business, which is exactly as it should be, and do so in a way that is non-provocative, right? I mean, that's the way that freedom of navigation exercises and operations are designed. They're just there to enhance and endorse, support the international law, and are not meant to be provocative in any way. And so I think that continuing in that way, and so being present in and around the Taiwan Straits, consistent with international law, I think is very, very important. It would be difficult if we left that area for too long. It would be very, very difficult, perhaps, to get back in. And so continuing that and normalizing it to the greatest degree. And then, of course, I think that our activities, and as you said, the specifics would be done much more quietly, but in the interest of deterrence, which is sort of our theme today, we would want to make it clear that any kind of provocation or onset of more aggressive behavior would just be counterproductive for everybody in the region, including China, right, and Taiwan. We need a cooperative approach across the straits, where consistent with the history there, the recent history, both nations can continue to do business. But this is one area where I do get concerned that transparency is absolutely essential, so that we don't get into a kind of a provocative stance, right? And then there might be some impulse to respond to an expectation or the understanding of an expectation, and we get out sort of ahead of our headlights there, and some action is taken, which can quickly spiral, right? Particularly given the tensions in the region. So I think that deep breathing, continued presence, and a firm assurance that the peaceful settlement and the peaceful operation in and around the Taiwan Strait is the much preferred way ahead. That nobody benefits from stepping out and and doing anything more aggressive.
Thank you. Takei-san?
Yeah. So when I was active duty, we are not allowed to travel to Taiwan. In Japan, not only the military, the self-defense force personnel, but also the government officials of certain rank and above are not allowed to go to Taiwan even for sightseeing. This situation continues still now. So in other words, despite the world's growing interest in the peace and the stability in the Taiwan Strait, most government officials involved in the policy making in Japan have never been to Taiwan. So they do not know who is their counterpart and what the Taiwan military capabilities are. The biggest problem is that even Japan and Taiwan is a very geographical, the position is geographically proximity. There is no communication mechanism to prevent accident when expected incident occurs. So first of all, Japan and Taiwan should establish that framework to prevent the unexpected incident between two countries, at sea and at the air. And next is if Japan wants to maintain the peace and the stability in the Taiwan Strait, they must start by getting to know about Taiwan. I think the situation is very similar in the United States. So the current strategic environment strongly call for the opportunity for exchange with Taiwan for sake of regional peace and stability. First is establish the communication mechanism. Second is enhance the people-to-people exchange with government officials and military personnel. Third is, I think this is the biggest concern or the issues in Japan is Japan Business Foundation and other economic organization are opposed to a competitive China policy. I think possibly they fear of the worsening economic relations with China, as well as in case of something happened between Taiwan and China, Chinese harassment against Japanese company, the business person and their families reside in China. There are about 13,600 Japanese companies operating in China, and 112,000 Japanese people stationed in China. So the next question is Japanese government and Japanese private company should think how to protect their companies or their government employees in China and Taiwan in case of Taiwan Strait crisis. I think the issues could be prioritized to think about the Taiwan Strait crisis. Thank you.
Yeah, Yuki, before we go on, if I could perhaps add on,
Sure.
I agree with that. And this is an area where increased communication mechanisms are needed really across the board between many nations, exactly for the reason that Takei-san highlights, which is that in the almost inevitable incident that will occur, right? We need to be able to get in touch with each other quickly so that we can prevent something like that from escalating into something it was never intended to be, right? But which might just happen by virtue of lack of communication. So not only with Taiwan, but with China and so many others in the region, these types of hotlines, if you will, I think would be a terrific first step.
Thank you. So I guess I'm going to roll two more questions into one, and then I think that might finish out the hour really, because it's another mouthful one. So in the 2+2 statement earlier this year, the two sides, both countries that agreed to discuss further about the further revising or fine-tuning roles, missions, and capabilities between the two countries. So how do you see that I guess, a fine-tuning process will evolve. And especially command and control always and communication seem to be always seem to be the key area for those for the two countries to continue to work on. So how do you, just across the board on the RMC evolution, how would you like to see it evolve? And as we continue to think about the stabilizing the situation and how to further stop China from further escalating the its behavior, what kind of a role that the Coast Guard you see play in close cooperation with the Navy, not just within U.S. Japan or between U.S. Japan, but then across the board in the Indo-Pacific. So I would start John, if you will, and then I'll finish off with Takei-san.
Okay, now happy to do that. And I think that it's very consistent with our discussion today, Yuki, that even between two allies as firmly and closely connected as US and Japan, there can always be room for more, right? Particularly as the global strategic environment changes and also the global technological environment changes. There's nothing but opportunity that lay out in front of us. And so between two nations who are as closely connected in the eyes of the world, really, as the United States and Japan, I think that, again, as I said earlier, this type of increased cooperation should be as visible as conditions would allow and give a strong implication that there's much more going on, beneath the waterline, if you will, that makes this relationship even more powerful. I think that in this region, in terms of roles, missions, and capabilities, we would quickly neck down to an effort that would concentrate certainly on the maritime domain. I agree with you, Yuki, that this is sort of a prominent domain, if not the prominent domain in the area. Also, the air domain, very, very important, as we've seen air defense zones and such being challenged. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, as we move into the information domain and information warfare, and so this would include things like space, cooperation in the electromagnetic spectrum, cyber, and sort of network warfare, system level warfare. I think this type of collaboration really knits two nations together in an almost inseparable way. And I would say that in those three domains, if you will, it should also kind of be multifaceted. Certainly in the technological area, we should share technology at the very highest levels of capability, right? And there's some stunning capabilities in terms of artificial intelligence, quantum, machine learning, autonomy, so many things that are just very fertile ground for us to continue to cooperate in technology. I've mentioned information sharing many times today. And I think that that's very linked to technology. I think technology gives rise to methods, software-based approaches, et cetera, that can allow us to share even more than we have, right? The Five Eyes arrangement has been, very good for the Five Eyes, but we need to look at expanding that into emerging partners that we can share at the very, very highly classified level. I think also, as I've said, we've got to get out and operate together, right? And so continue not necessarily more, but more complex operations, those types of things that would give anybody who would observe those, and all will, pause in terms of this is a highly capable and committed force, not one that I would want to tangle with. And then, Takei has always been a genius in terms of emphasizing the importance of people in strategic partnerships. One of the things that I was so happy about when we served together was that Takei-san started, a sponsorship program for officers of the U.S. Navy to be sponsored by counterparts in the Kaijo Jeitai when they would go over and serve in Japan. And those people partnerships, in terms of building the levels of trust and confidence that must underpin all of these types of arrangements, particularly when you get into command and control, right? Because, this is, trusted confidence is the coin of the realm in command and control. And so these partnerships that begin in our fleets, with our junior officers, in our schools, in our staffs, all of those things allow those people to get to know each other, so that as they become more senior and end up, leading bigger and bigger parts of their forces, their countries, they can grow together, right? And that trust and confidence allows us to partner so much more. With respect to the Coast Guard, Yuki, just quickly, the United States has blended the Coast Guard in very, very seamlessly into maritime operations, but always with the distinction, right, that there is a difference in the nature between the United States Navy and its mission and the United States Coast Guard and its mission. And so, again, very clear, very transparent, and our behavior matches, those distinctions. So this is an area where there's a lot of people concerned, I think, about the lack of that clarity on the part of the Chinese. I said when I was still on active duty that really, the Chinese Coast Guard is an extension and behaves with the to achieve the missions of the Chinese Navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy, and that I think raises trouble for all, right? It just muddies the waters and increases ambiguity, and so I think that Coast Guards have a tremendous role to play. The Navy and the U.S. Coast Guard have partnered together, and the Coast Guard has partnered. U.S. Coast Guard has partnered very fruitfully with other Coast Guards around the world. But the distinction of what they do versus what the Navy do, I think, is very important. So, anyway, I'll stop there and give my good friend some time before we close out the hour.
So I think
sorry to be sober both times.
Okay, then Takei-san, I think we would ask you to wrap it up for all of us then.
Okay. Yeah. And then at first, the RMC is old but new problem and issues between two countries. The first time the RMC could be questioned was, I think it is 1997, when the US-Japan joint declaration between the President Clinton and Prime Minister Hashimoto declares. At that time, the RMC could be one of the issues between two countries. However, at that point, the RMC discussion, the two governments played down RMC, too much focusing on the base relocation. So the RMC discussion was stopped, freezed at this time. The situation is dramatically changed. The strategic situation dramatically changed around Japan. So the currently RMC is really important to control the current situation in not only Taiwan Strait, but also the Senkakus and Sea of Japan and the other countries around in the Pacific. And two countries need to, I think need 3 steps. First is to set up theater of operation, where two forces work together, fight together. Second is what operation to forces fight and operate cooperatively. And third is the times when such a cooperation occurred in the peacetime, gray zone, and wartime. In 1997, at that time, the theater of operation is very small around Japan and maybe the Far East. But currently, the theater of operation widened, maybe the half of the Pacific Ocean, maybe include Indian Ocean. So the two countries need to discuss where we work together and fight together against the threat. I think that the situation, the procedure, through the procedure, the two countries find the best way to deter Chinese misbehaviors. The last one is the role and mission of the Japanese Coast Guard. And US Coast Guard is extending their sphere of operation to the Pacific Ocean. I think it is very welcome to the country in the region. And the question is how the Japanese Coast Guard will change. I think it is very difficult because the Japanese Coast Guard law does not allow the Coast Guard to conduct any military operations. So when the situation is related to the sovereignty of a sovereignty right, the Japanese Coast Guard does not touch this operation at all. So the Tokyo need to strengthen the how to control the gray zone situation in Senkaku's and Nansei and the Southwest Island chain. At that time, how the Japanese Coast Guard should be utilized is one of the biggest questions for Japanese government. My opinion is I think the Japanese government should add the Japanese Coast Guard as the mission to protect sovereignty or sovereignty right in gray zone, between gray zone and the war. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this is what happens when we have a very articulate naval leaders on panel. Hour fly by, and we could continue this conversation for another hour for a whole host of issues, because I have all these questions now that I would like to explore with you. But it is 8:01, and it's very late in Japan for Takei-san, and we should make sure that he will get a good night's sleep.
Thank you.
Again, it was such an honor to welcome you both to Simpson's webinar this morning or this evening, depending on where you're logging in from. And thank you everyone for joining us from the both sides of the Pacific to hear these naval leaders' thoughts. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yuki, for being such a wonderful moderator.
Goodbye. See you again.
See you soon. I hope to see you all soon in person.
Okay, so we got to get together soon in person, huh?
Yes, of course.